Welcome AP World History students to your foundations test. This is your first test of the year. There'll be a few hard questions in here, but not quite as rough as what you're going to get a little bit later on. Okay, let's jump into it. We got 25 questions coming up. When we talk about the river valley civilizations, make sure that you know which river is associated with each civilization. Of course, the Nile is associated with the Egyptians, the Tigris Euphrates is associated with the Mesopotamians. The Indus River is associated with the Harappan or the Indus Valley civilization. And of course, the Yellow River is attached to the Chinese. So make sure you know that. When we talk about ancient history, I mean, even right at the very beginning of civilization, we talk about agriculture. Hunting and gathering societies begin to be displaced. We move away from it. And really, more than anything, what makes that the case is the fact that cultivation becomes very stable. We're able to have regular food, and that's very attractive, of course, to people. It's a better way. It's not necessarily easy because farming is difficult, but it is a more stable food supply. So keep that in mind. When we talk about Mesopotamia, there are a few characteristics. Of course, the Tigris and Euphrates River. We know that it was located in modern-day Iraq, and they had several city-states that made up the Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, the Akkadians. Of course, probably the most well-known is the Sumerians, who, of course, had cuneiform, our first written language in history. And we consider the Mesopotamians as the first civilization so far that we've found. Perhaps that could change one day with some archaeological evidence. Indo-Europeans, you need to know this group. We didn't really talk about it too much in class, but they're incredibly important. They're the Central European language group. So they're different types of people that share a language group, and they spread out throughout the world in all directions. They go to Europe, and they go to the Mediterranean, even into India. And what they do that really changes the world is the fact that they domesticate horses. And they're going to take that domestication with them when they travel. And so you have diffusion. You have them taking this knowledge with them to new places. So it's very important there. Egypt. We talk about Egypt as being, this gift of the Nile, as Herodotus calls it. And we talked about the Nile in class. We talked about how the Nile, the current flows north to south, south to north, but the winds go north to south. And so you can travel either way with the Nile River, up and down it very easily for trade, which is definitely very important to the economy of Egypt. So it is really a gift of the gods, as he thought. With the Egyptians, in the early days, you had Upper and Lower Egypt that were two separate kingdoms. But under Menes, he would end up unifying the two sections and would bring Egypt under control of one government, one power. When we talk about the Indus River Valley, we don't know nearly as much about them because while they have a written language, we have found their language, we have not deciphered it yet. So until we can find some kind of Rosetta Stone or some kind of key that will help us decipher their religion, there's still going to be a lot of secrets with the Harappans, the Indus Valley. However, we do know that these cities of 40 and 50,000, such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were highly centralized because they have such incredible cities built upon grid-like patterns. We know that they had sewage systems and things like that. So you have to have a centralized bureaucracy to be able to do that, to be able to have these big cities. Now, as time went on, the Harappan civilization fell, probably due to drought, and people abandoned the cities because there just wasn't a big enough food supply for that many people. So people just kind of scattered. It's not long after that a group called the Aryans would come into India. And the Aryans would mix with the native Indian people called the Dravidians, which was a language group of India. And the Aryans would bring with them something that develops called the caste system. And the caste system is very important because even today in India, the caste system has this role in their society. And what it does is it makes society stable. Nobody else really has the caste system anywhere else. It's fairly unique to India. It's kind of rigid. It's not very easy to get out of your caste. And there's a lot of rules. You know, if you're in a certain caste, you can only marry people from certain caste and things like that. But the caste system is going to play a big role in India. Biggest thing is that social stability with it. Moving over to China, of course, China comes up along the Yellow River, and the Yellow River has its own nickname, not the gift of the Nile this time, but China's sorrow. The Yellow River is a very unpredictable and violent river, prone to flooding, and that flooding would lead to massive drought because the crops would be destroyed. And you're talking hundreds of thousands of people dying because of this. So, a very dangerous river. It gave them their civilization, but it exacted a toll as it went along as well. Um, the first dynasty of the Chinese, of course, were the Xia. They're replaced by the slightly larger, a little more centralized Shang, who specialized in bronze. And then you had a more powerful dynasty come along to replace the Shang called the Zhou dynasty. And the Zhou dynasty is a little bit different. They're going to decentralize because they're bigger and the technology is not very good. So you can only rule a certain size area with that kind of technology. And what they're going to do is they're going to divide their area up amongst the relatives, and they have to trust that their family members can, rule these regions. And the problem is, as time goes on, after 700 years of Zhou rulers, is that they're going to start squabbling with each other, and it's going to tear China apart and lead us to the Warring States period. So they have that trust that they put into their families degrades over time. Moving into our classical time period, we talk about the Persians. And the Persians are amazing, founded by Cyrus the Great, this tolerant ruler, the first guy who comes in and conquers a place. And he's going to go to your temples and say a prayer to your God that had never been really done before. Typically, if you took somebody over, you destroyed all their temples and their statues and stuff, and you killed people and made them slaves. He doesn't do that. And, they still had rebellions on occasion, but he treated them better. He treated the Jews better than anyone had ever treated them before. And, beyond him, Darius the Great becomes this great administrator of their massive empire, the largest empire in history. And so these Achaemenid dynasty, the first ones, they had great centralized authority and great lines of communication. They had the Great Royal Road. They could reach anywhere in their empire within 2 weeks. They were very quick on communication, and that allowed them to rule very effectively. Moving over to Greece, we had, or actually, I guess this is still Persia, the Persian Wars. That is between Persia and Greece. Persia is trying to expand their empire. They put down a rebellion in Ionia. The Ionian Greeks rebel against them. The Persians are ticked off about it. The Greeks, the Athenians, make the mistake of helping the Ionians, and so it's going to lead the Greeks to attack, or the Persians to attack mainland Greece, and you're going to have a series of wars. It really results in a draw. The Persians cannot take over Greece, but the Greeks are certainly not powerful enough at the time to go into Persia and overtake them. It won't be until Alexander the Great that the Greeks are powerful enough to overthrow the Persian Empire. But it's coming. The economic foundation of Persia, without a doubt, is agriculture. And to be fair, that's the economic basis of several civilizations. But Persia, although it's in, a lot of it's in the desert, their Qanat system is very effective, and they're able to grow large amounts of food, barley, wheat, stuff like that. And so they're going to be able to, with that surplus, trade food, and that's always important. Um, Over in China in classical time, remember we have the Qin dynasty and we have the Han dynasty. Confucianism becomes this basis of society eventually after the Qin dynasty, during the Han dynasty. And, Confucianism is based off of 5 relationships that a king and his subjects, a subject is expected to pay taxes and fight wars for the king when he needs them. The king is expected to protect his people and treat them right. That's the relationship. There's a relationship between a husband and a wife, a certain way that you treat each other, a relationship between father and son, and mother and daughter, and friend to friend. They have these relationships Confucianism is based off of. We know that Confucianism will eventually become the educational system in China. Now, before that happens, the first dynasty of classical China is, of course, the Qin under Shi Huangdi. And the big thing with Shi Huangdi is that he's brutal, but he's effective. They are coming out of the Warring States period. There's chaos throughout the empire for hundreds of years, and he fixes it. He beats everybody up, basically, but he gets everybody in line. He standardizes everything. He's all about it. He burns books. He's not about education. He wants you to think what he wants you to think. He's burning scholars, Confucian scholars alive. He doesn't care. But that's legalism will be the way that he tries to restore order in China, and he makes it. He does restore order. But legalism is a kind of system that can't last forever. And so after he dies, his son only rules for 3 years before they overrule him and pull him down, and the Han dynasty begins. Now, China always struggles with these northern dynasties, whether it's Mongols, Turks, Huns, whoever it may be. They always put a lot of strain on China coming in out of Central Asia. They have plenty of issues, but that one more than any other is their main issue. Moving into classical India, we have two main dynasties separated by a couple hundred years. India's a little bit different. Their imperial rule is a little less than the other places, and they're not quite as big and powerful as China or as Persia, Greece, or Rome. And Chandragupta, without a space, Chandragupta, one word, is the founder of the Mauryan dynasty, which is the first dynasty. His grandson, Ashoka, will be the high point of the Mauryan dynasty. He's the most powerful. He puts forth the stone pillar edicts, which told his law to the people of his kingdom. Marriage in classical India, the poor girls, they're having to marry. There's a lot of child marriage, a lot of young girls being married off to men in their 30s and 40s and stuff. And a wife is expected to be very weak-willed and extremely loyal to her husband. If her husband dies, it'd be nice if she jumped on the funeral pyre with him. This didn't happen a lot, but there was sort of an expectation for it. And again, they're not allowed to have intercaste marriage. When you're in a class, there are certain rules on who you can actually marry and who you can't. Moving over to Greece, lots of important names in Greece. You had Homer, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. You had Sophocles, who was a famous writer who wrote Oedipus Rex. You had Aristotle, the famous philosopher. Socrates, the father of philosophy. Plato, his student. And then you had Pericles, who was perhaps the greatest Athenian leader, Athens being a particular city-state in Greece. And he ruled over Greece's golden age. 32 of 50 years of Greece's golden age were under Pericles' rule. A general, a statesman, an orator. Yeah, he had it all. Very impressive. Now, under his rule, the Greeks developed something called the Delian League. And what this was a protection agency against Persians to help keep the Persians from invading them. And they would basically, all the city-states would donate money to Athens, and Athens was the head of it, and it was Athens' job to make sure and protect the other Greeks. Well, under Pericles, a lot of this money, he went to strengthening Athens, and that would eventually lead to the Peloponnesian War, a civil war between the Greek city-states, between Athens and Spartan and their allies. So keep that in mind, that those are the two powerhouses. Athens and Spartans are the two powerhouses of Greece. Eventually, after 20 years, Sparta would win the Peloponnesian War, and they would burn Athens. Athens was the home place of democracy. Most Greeks were not democratic, but the Athenians were. The Spartans themselves were a monarchy. Many of the Greeks were monarchies. Some of the Greeks were oligarchies. Some of the Greeks were dictatorships. They had all kinds of different styles of ruling. But the Athenians are something a little bit different. Philosophy, art, humanities, science, the Athenians have it all. Greek philosophy, really, they base it off of human reason. So Greek philosophy kind of turns into your earliest science. And a lot of your Europeans later on will look to the Greeks to help them reinvent their science. Let's see. All right, last part, the Romans. Rome was divided up into two periods: a republic, where they were a democracy and they had representatives represent them. Um, and then later on, after Caesar, basically you get the Roman Empire, the second part, where you have Caesar's ruling in what is actually a monarchy disguised as a republic, but it's definitely one ruler. The Caesars run the show. And Roman Republic was really split into two groups: the patricians and the plebeians. And it's the patricians are the rich ones, and they're the ones running the society. Rome has a lot of poor people. There are very wealthy people in Rome. There's not a big middle class. There are a lot of poor. There are a lot of slaves, both in Greece and Rome. A third of the population is made up of slaves. Roman family was very important, and there's a lot to it. I mean, a father could sell his children into slavery to pay debts. Now, remember, slavery is temporary. So once their children paid off their debt, then they would get their children back. But it was something they could do. Uh, the eldest male, the one who ran the show in the family, was called paterfamilias. They're the authority of everything. And women have an important role, but it is domestic. It's in the home. But it's very important amongst the wealthy families that women are basically managers and supervisors of the family. And last really topic is the growth of Christianity in the Roman Empire. Christianity is a break off of Judaism under Jesus. And, of course, Jesus is crucified, and his followers, the apostles, are going to spread the Christian language. But what really helps the Christian language become big is when finally Roman emperors convert to Christianity. Once they do that, there's a lot of emphasis on Christianity throughout the enormous Roman Empire. And so that's really going to spread it. And Christianity is very attractive to the lower class people because of its messages of servants and serving, not being wealthy and stuff. A lot of people in the cities like Christianity. Women like Christianity because there's spiritual equality. They may not be equal in, say, politics, but in the religion of Christianity, it's much more equal. The women have a bigger say there. Okay, guys, that's really your test in a nutshell. This should be very beneficial to you. Hope you guys do an excellent job on it, and good luck.